But again, thank you for being here. I'm sorry to say that Andreas Alcantar, from the commissioner from the Workforce Commission, is not able to be here. We heard from him about 2 hours ago that his mother-in-law is very ill, and he and his wife are on the way to California this afternoon. So I want you to know he's a big supporter of all your efforts. He helped provide funding for this handbook you're going to hear about at the end of the meeting. He's an amazing person. If you ever have a chance to hear him, please do. If you ever need some help with your efforts, if there's a way to get federal money for it, he finds a way. Those of you that might be familiar with Accelerate Texas, he's found millions of dollars from the federal government to help those of you at community colleges that are working with that program, and soon that will all be housed at the Workforce Commission. So we hope his mother-in-law is okay. But having said that, I'm pleased to say that the person who actually wrote the handbook is going to have the opportunity to actually present her work. And we're really glad to have her with us. Kyla Torrey is a former K-12 teacher, and for the past 6 years has been training teachers at Long Island University, which was I used to teach at Hofstra, which was not far away from LIU. But she's been training teachers at Long Island University, Hunter College. Those of you familiar with New York know that's one of the premier spots for training teachers. And the City College in the City University of New York system. She's conducted research on teacher effectiveness, educational technology, mental health in schools, and has advised schools and organizations on inclusion of students with disabilities. She joined us at the coordinating board in January as a temporary research assistant. Hope to do something about that temporary. She just earned her PhD in September 2017, which is amazing to think of all the work she did in the research before that from the City University of New York Graduate Center, which is, those of you who are familiar with New York, that's sort of a unique organization in which they benefits from faculty at all the institutions in the City of New York system and brings together the graduate faculty from Queens, Brooklyn College, and those types of things in a very sort of cost-efficient way, and an interesting model for us to look at in Texas. She also has a master's in urban education. So because she's here, I'm going to sit quietly for the most part as she really tells you all about this. And is it okay, Kyle, if they bring up points they'd like to make as you go along? So I encourage you to do that. It will help keep us all active, and we won't stay longer than we need to as well. So again, I want to thank you for coming. I'm really encouraged by your participation today, and I know the students in Texas are going to benefit, so thank you.
All right, hello. So all of you have the handbook in your packet that you got in your red folder. So I'm going to walk you through it a little bit, but I really want to talk about how we use it. So we'll get to that. But all right, so let's talk about how it fits in with the goal that we're talking about today, the marketable skills goal. The point of the handbook is really to help students market themselves and to understand what they're learning throughout college that's going to help them get a job later on. So, knowing what skills they're learning in their program is a beginning, but they really need to be able to put themselves out there to market themselves as they go out into the job world. So this is supposed to be used as part of that process of them learning to market themselves. So this is the result of a grant from the TWC to the coordinating board. It's one of the deliverables of the grant that was given to us in 2015. And it was to be particularly focused on what employers expect from graduates and what students can do to improve their employability. So this is the final product of that. The TWC has 2 existing handbooks. There's a handbook for middle school students, that's the career investigation, and that handbook talks about the high school endorsements, talks a little bit about what you want to look for when you're starting to think about a career. And then there's Career Success for high school students, which talks about looking past high school to what your choices are. And then so Career Readiness, which is what you have, is the third in the series. And it's for college students to think about their career once they leave the institution. So what's in the handbook? There's a lot. We really wanted to make the handbook interactive, so it's not just a resource, but it also involves activities. The PDF that will be available to you has hyperlinks in it, so there's lots of resources outside just what's in the paper handbook. And so we thought it could be used both as a reference for students, but also as part of advising at the institution. And we'll talk a little bit more about what kinds of things you might do with the handbook later on. So it begins with why this is relevant to students, right? I mean, we've talked about the fact that most students go into college saying that they want a better job when they get out. And so the handbook begins just by explaining why are you getting this document at your orientation or whenever, why is it relevant to you? And then it goes on to define what hard skills and soft skills are. We use the NACE the NACE competencies as far as soft skills go, just because it was a nice, simple way to go. They have very defined a defined set of competencies, and we use those to set up some of the activities later on and just center sort of the soft skills part of the handbook. So this is an example of one of the activities in the handbook. What soft and hard skills do you need for your future career? So it sets out a couple of different professions and some hard and soft skills that you might need for those professions, and then it asks the students to come up with other examples, and then it asks them to think about their future career and what hard and soft skills they might need for their future career. So it talks then about how to develop those soft skills, and the focus, it talks about curricular activities, but goes into more depth on co-curricular activities, especially internships and apprenticeships. It talks about the National Apprentice Registry. Is it registry? Yes. And it gives information for that. It gives information about what sorts of questions you want to ask when you're going into an internship. It gives Department of Labor data. There's a link to the Department of Labor guidelines for what an internship should be, paid versus unpaid, those sorts of things. Here's another example of an activity. Where did you learn each soft skill? So based around the NACE competencies, where did you learn particular skills? So through your classes, through these extracurricular activities, through these co-curricular activities, how did you learn these skills? And then students can see also where they may not have learned certain skills and where they might want to take up another activity or to think about a different class that might fill some of those gaps. So the idea of the handbook was to provide it for students at orientation originally. And so it really encourages students to start thinking about career planning early. It does talk to them several times about going to career services early on in their college careers. It talks about them learning to market their skills. It talks about the future considerations in the workforce. So why, how is the workforce going to change? How can you become a lifelong learner of different skills? Those sorts of things. And it does talk a little bit about graduate school because they will have to, market their skills to get into graduate school as well as to go onto the workforce afterwards. it guides students to a career. So it goes through this Inquire, Research, Act, and talks about different suggestions under each headline about what students can do during that stage of their career search. So Inquire is really about exploring their interests. Where can they go to think about what they might be interested in, what sorts of careers are out there, what's going to fulfill the sorts of lifestyle they want, that sort of thing. And then building relationships. They should go to faculty, they should go to office hours, they should go to career services, and they should maybe start to find mentors and other people who can help them on their career paths. Research is really about finding out what career is best for you. So it talks more about internships, it talks about informational interviewing, going to job fairs, those sorts of things. And then ACT is the practical steps of building your resume and your cover letter. What is an interview? What is expected of you in an interview? So most students do, of course, work while they're in school, and this also talks about how you can find a job while you're in school if you want one, and gives some resources as to how that might be possible. And then to help students market themselves. And this just explains very briefly what all of these things are, why you need them, and how you can go about starting a resume, starting a cover letter. What does networking mean? How can I do it? And then there are lists of resources in the back. There's a bunch of job sites, internship sites, things of that nature. There's also a list of all the websites that are linked within the document. So if you're just looking at the document itself, you can't get to the hyperlinks, then all of the websites are in the back for you to look at. There's career information sites, all of those things are there as resources for students, so it's really a good reference for students to use. Okay, you can all see those things because you have the handbook in front of you, so that's enough of that. I'd like to have a discussion about how we can use this handbook, why I don't want all of my hard work to go to waste, and so I would like you guys to use it, and I would like students to use it, and so I'm wondering, how can we make that happen at our institutions? Is this just something that we hand out at orientation? Is it something you put on the institutional website? It is available as an accessible PDF, and we're in the process of graphic design and things, so it's going to look a lot different than it looks now. but it will be available as an accessible PDF. So aside from that, I'm thinking these are some of the ideas that we came up with using the handbook in a first year or course development class, to have faculty advisors share with students when they're thinking about their major or along their path, to bring it into career services workshops and job fairs and things of that nature. And just in any way that you want to use it in conjunction with informing skills about the marketable skills in their students about the marketable skills in their program. But I'd really like to hear more from you all about how you think something like this might be used, and we can have some questions. Hi.
Can it be customized by the university?
That's a really good question.
I'm just going to repeat the question so that it gets on film. And the question was, can the handbook be customized by the institution? And the answer is no. So I can chime in and say we talked about that early on. We actually wanted that to be the model, but we had to utilize our resources in the best way that we could because they were temporary resources. So we developed the handbook. We are working with a graphic artist to make it prettier than what you see in your book. But if you would like for us to do that, I mean, we do plan on having a final product, but if you would like for us to share the Word document with you so you can modify it and create your own document, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that for you. Yeah, sure, we'll share you the Word document. Yeah. We'll create a final product because that was a deliverable for us. I mean, we have to meet our clients, but we'd be happy to share.
And I would think over time that we would hope to learn from our experience with it and adapt and modify it, and times change. So if you do modify it, we'd be interested in knowing how you're doing that and what you're finding is useful and not. And I'm thinking back to when I was 18. I think I can remember that. And thanks for not laughing. These were a lot of questions I didn't ask. And they seem sort of obvious, but they're not so obvious when you're 8. Or maybe even if you return when you're 35 and you're doing something different, these are things you have to think about. How many of you thought when you were 18 you'd be here today doing this? So everyone's honest. I would have thought that. So we know that finding your path, even if you're for those few that are very certain, even those folks, things change as you go forward and the things you didn't think about. So I think this is a good way to sort of trigger the thought. And many of us remember, what was the publication about the parachute that many people used, but it was more designed for later on. But this is trying to trigger that thinking initially. So please, suggestions, let's make it better and better.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Bell. I'm from the El Paso Community College. The vast majority of our student population is first-generation college students, and I greatly appreciate all the work that goes into creating documents like this, but even I find myself looking at it going, that's a lot of information hitting you really fast. And we were just having a conversation about, pacing for a student, and how much information do you give them in like a gulp or at a time? So how would you recommend pacing this information, particularly for a student who has never known anyone to go through college before?
Yeah, so I really feel like a lot of this is going to be institution by institution, right? You're going to do what makes sense for your school culture. But I believe that this document is a good resource for students. I don't believe it should necessarily be handed to them as as a book and say, go along your merry way and figure out your own career. I think it should be broken down into parts and fed to them, and whether it's through career services or through their advisory or whatever the case may be.
Again, we'd like your feedback. Once you've used it to have suggestions for other people and how one might sort of get it out to students in a meaningful way. And even with your students, they're not, even though many of them, as you described, that doesn't mean there's all the same too. And you may notice differences within that group that you might be able to provide advice to others in terms of 2 or 3 different basic paths that's more useful.
Hi, my name is Alejandra from Sol Ross. My comment is in the same vein. One, how do you unfold it for a student? 2, format. There's been plenty of discussion around today about meeting the students where they are, and I don't think a PDF is going to meet students where they are. So I guess just a suggestion as you look forward to revisions, try to think of platforms and different formats in which this could be delivered to a student.
Yeah, we considered things like apps and things like that, but it really was a resource question as far as.
But if we are able to share the document with you, the Word document, and you're able to develop different platforms for your students to use, please do.
And if it appears that some other platform would be useful, perhaps TWC would give us some resources to do that. But I'm glad you have a comment from Alpine and from El Paso, because even where you're located makes a difference. So if you're talking about internships or work It's a very different world in Alpine than it is in El Paso, and so you're going to have to talk to them a little differently about that. And so that's just one example of even where you're located makes a difference.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Miller, and I'm also from Sul Ross. I wonder if perhaps these valuable ideas might be introduced later on, not the very first semester of your college experience. So like looking at your list here, instance in your life or a class of school where you use this skill. I really believe that maybe the sophomore year is a better year to introduce this. We can't really do this the first week of fish camp. I think it's more beneficial if we weave it throughout the experience.
So I'm hearing the beginnings of a possible work group, where maybe we gather together and talk about how to dole this out over time. Where should different pieces be introduced to students? Ellen had talked this morning about a really important piece of their work is making students reflect on what they do. And so if this document can lead into something like that, exercises of reflection, all the better. So I think we'd be happy to try and assemble that work, but really you are the ones who know what your students need, so you would have to do the work. If you're willing, we're happy to host. So yes, that'd be a great conversation to have.
I think probably following along that line, one of the things that I have not heard over the course of the past day is the influence of family on career development, career freedom, the ability to go to Iowa like the woman last night. And a lot of our students wouldn't even consider that as an option, nor would their families allow them to even have the conversation to think about it and talk about it. And so a lot of this, it seems like it's a wonderful resource, but there's a piece missing. How do you talk to your family about X, Y, and Z? How do you introduce this with your sister, your mother, your whoever, that this is the direction that I'm wanting to go? Because that is a real piece, especially for first-gen students.
Not so much a question, just maybe asking a larger question if this study has been done. I'm always interested in unintended consequences, especially as a father of a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old. Unintended consequences seem to rear their head every day, fears of unintended consequences. And I'm wondering, with the narrative that we have going on in the country of mental health, and the last week heard a counselor, longtime counselor, say that we're reaching unprecedented levels of depression and anxiety in young students and children. And I'm wondering, I don't know if there's a study being done, and I am not volunteering to be on any committee, nor any long-term longitudinal research project. I already have my doctorate. Thank you very much. But I'm wondering if there's any correlative study of career selection and moving this into K-12 and having to identify this at an earlier age. Like you said, you didn't select your degree. It wasn't even on your mind when you were 18, and now we're shifting that to younger ages. I'm wondering if there's any correlation between mandating career selection and career pathways and really early ages. Like, I don't know what I want to do. Are we doing that?
Yeah,
Are we fostering some of this rise in anxiety?
Because part of what you're talking about is a change in the public schools and the endorsements, selecting endorsements and talking about careers when you're in the 9th grade, 8th grade. Yeah, you're supposed, but in really, we need to understand that. I mean, I don't understand that. One could say I'm still wondering what I should do now. I know lots of children, and still in middle schools, high schools, college, adults in college. And I think part of this is, in my mind, is pointing out that there are options. Some people don't have as many options. I think some of the problems is if people force them to make decisions. One of my concerns about the public schools is, are they being taken down a path where it's hard to change. Personally, everybody told me I should be a lawyer, to the point I was accepted to law school and thought, I don't want to be a lawyer. I'm sorry if there are any lawyers here, but I would have been a miserable lawyer. But I had been told that my whole life, so I sort of know what you're talking about. But part of it is, some ways we need to open up the world to students, because there are many things that they only know from their own life experience, their own parents' experience, and that there are possibilities they may not know about. And there may be different steps. So there may be somebody who wants to become a lawyer, but to get there, they need to start out by getting a certificate at a community college to earn a gainful wage to save up enough money to do that later, if that's what they want to do. And so part of this is, I hope that we will find a way to help students know they have options, how they can deal with options, how they'd not be overwhelmed by options. But I think what your question is very important right now, and I do think we need to make a note, Ginger, that however we can follow up on that. But we still don't know what's going to be coming out of high school now with these new conditions. I was saying earlier, many of us didn't know when we were 18. Well, I sure wouldn't have known when I was in the 8th grade. Except maybe a lawyer, because people have been telling me that since I was even younger, just because I'm annoying. I haven't gotten over that part. But don't let us forget that question, is if you make observations without having to do research, share them with us, because we don't want people to be overwhelmed. We don't want them to be additionally stressed because here's another decision they have to make. We'd like to help them know that to whatever extent possible, they're in control of some of this. Other people aren't determining it for them. Let me give you one quick example, and then we'll get to you. Our former vice chair of the board is a doctor here in Houston, an MD, and he went to Alamo Community College, and he went to meet with his advisor. And she said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I want to be a doctor." And she looked at his transcript and looked at him and said, "Well, it's going to be hard, but let's figure out how to do it." So she was both honest, but she helped chart a path. And he's been a very successful physician in the Houston area with a large group, because she worked with him and didn't just automatically look and say it's hopeless. He said anyone else might have said that. So we need to find a way to be realistic, to not put undue pressure on folks, because there is a lot of pressure, especially if you're economically disadvantaged. You have additional concerns if you come from a home where they may be discouraging you from doing certain things because it's not possible. But part of what we need to help do is sort of help point out, if this is really what you want to do and you want to put the effort into it, here's a way to make it happen. That's not easy. So I think she went, and you may want to make a comment back, but
it's so much fun. Yeah, it's okay. Don't sit on the hands. We're all there. As an observation and as an early childhood educator and somebody who's worked many years with infants through children, I value the opportunity for them to have the space to play. And I never thought I would be saying this, but I'm also the associate dean of a program that is a dual credit vocational nursing program, where we are literally interviewing sophomores right now for a 2-year program and graduating nurses. So finding the balance between both of those without restricting either one. We've given students who had no hope and had families that had no resources, hope and resources. But how do we, again, not take that at the cost of? So I never thought I would agree with dual credit programming, particularly the technical, but these are phenomenal young men and women who would never have been able to explore their potential without the opportunity. So just wanted to put that balance in, but completely agree. I still have a hard time with 6th through 8th grade being the time when you pick something.
El Paso, it looked like you might have wanted to say something a second ago, or did I just infer that? If you did, if you don't, that's okay. I just was paying attention to your...
Mostly I just wanted to echo that I agreed. A large section of the students that I have the honor of working with, because I am faculty, they want to leap into a particular program because they feel it's safe and it's something that they can do at a certain pace, and then they can finish, and then they can go support their family. And so encouraging them to go on internships is fantastic, but to them you might as well be telling them to go to Mars. You know, they really feel like it's something that a totally different life and a totally different person could do, but they struggle with. And so one of the pieces that we're wrestling with is how do we convince the student that they can dream big, and then they can engage these kinds of documents. And so we feel like we're kind of having the conversations you have before you even get here.
Yeah, and I would point out that the commissioner regularly, in his endorsements of internships, makes the point they need to be with credit, they need to be with money. Because otherwise it just doesn't work for those very students you're talking about. And you were wanting to say something up here, I think, in front. No? No? Okay, I thought maybe you were over here.
Okay, hi there. So, you know, in our own college, our campus, recently we talked about some of this, and, you know, as far as we're a technical college and having students come in, they say, oh, I want to be a welder, or I want to be this. And so just I would want to say as part of this, you know, be encouraging, of course, that they do things like those kind of career surveys, or you know, what are your interests, those kind of things, so that they do open up to those kinds of other issues. Because obviously there's you know, whether it's family influences, I want to do this job because it's makes a certain amount of money, all those kind of things. You know, there are a lot of different issues to think about, and so opening up students' minds. So I think having them take that opportunity to do that, and then maybe for the handbook as well, just have a section talking about the fact that this isn't, you know, the decision you make today is not the end of the road. And so if they're aware of that, or if you're trying to point out to them in the section on there, which I think is really nice, of, you know, what are different skills that go along with these, saying that these, you know, talk about transferable skills and things like that, to say these can be, you know, you can move on from this or something like that. But I think that something like that would be very useful to students to recognize that this is not the end, or there's a lot of other jobs that you might want to go to.
I think that's a really important point, because I've talked to so many students who think that they're making a decision which will remain with them for the rest of their life. And in one sense, it does, because they made the decision, but it doesn't mean they can't move in different directions afterwards. They're providing a foundation for whatever that next step must be. And so I think that's important to point out, because then it becomes much more stressful if you think, this is the next 50 years of my life. And so thank you.
Just this discussion is very interesting, because I see a lot of it in a lot of the stress in my students. And if you take a step back further, as the state continues to defund higher education and force those costs on families and so forth, then they also pass laws saying every degree has to be completed in 120 hours. So the stress is still there. That, in fact, we've had a provost previously that says you can't introduce minors because then you might go over 120 hours. You can't do this because it might go over 120 hours. So an even larger context to all this, and I appreciate this discussion, is the state mandating, since we're not going to fund higher education, we're going to get kids through as quick as we can, which means you better know in 8th grade.
No, I don't think so. And let me push back a little bit, because what you're saying is we should encourage students to take another 7 courses, even though it's going to cost them more. And that's the way it's going to be heard. I don't think that's what you mean.
That's not what I'm saying. But right.
Part of the reason for debt is our average university graduate takes 7 courses more than necessary for that degree. And so that means, number one, the state's funding hours that could be used to help students with other services that are needed. It means that those students very often are incurring an additional $15,000, $17,000 in debt. And we just have to be mindful of that. We don't expect everyone to graduate with 120 hours. One of the reasons, just a little background so you'll know, is that it hasn't been that long since a BBA in marketing at one school was 120 hours, at another school it was 143 hours, at another school it was 136. Same degree, different school. Is that really justifiable in terms of cost to the student and the state for that matter? So that's part of the context for it. And we believe that students should be able to explore, but we think students should be conscious of, if they take that, I always talk about Icelandic mythology, that they know that it's going to cost them another $2,000 in debt. So they are mindful of that they don't not do it unconsciously. And so, the research from the Brookings Institute has found that the average student has no idea how much debt they have as they go through school. And at many schools, if they have loans, they automatically get them the next year. And that's one reason why the legislature passed a law that students need to be informed to the best knowledge of the institution how much loan debt the student has, so they can make conscious decisions. But it's mainly with the student in mind, and I just want you to know that the amount of funding is a different issue. I just want to say that at a recent hearing, the commissioner talked about institutions have been doing more with less, but there's a limit to that. And we need to do a better job of making the case. And we need to do that together. We don't always do that together for the funding for higher education. And I have to say that if institutions can offer different levels of tuition, it makes it easier to not have that per FTSE funding the way it should be. And some of us remember that at one time, the legislature did a great job of, when increases in enrollments, that per FTSE funding stayed the same, but it went up, and that hasn't been the case for about 10 years now. And we need to, there are very real issues in terms of funding, and most of the institutions here don't have those large endowments or things where you can supplement that, and we're trying to find a way to make that case. So it may not sound like it, but I'm glad you brought that up. So thank you for that.
We've heard a lot last night and today about mentors, how you choose a mentor. That would be something I'd like to see in this handbook, because we have a lot of students at our institution that are very reluctant to go talk to professors. So providing some mechanisms and ways of doing that would be very helpful.
I think also providing a list of funding opportunities for students for travel costs or internships on a website would be helpful, along with large companies that are hiring. Because in rural areas, it's really hard to share with students possibilities in urban areas and have those types of partnerships. So if there was a way that could be coordinated to help at your level, to help all institutions, I think that would be helpful.
So the Texas Workforce Commission has an initiative right now, and I think it's called the internship. It's called something internships.
Texas Works.
Texas Works. And so there is a website with consolidated internships available across the state. I don't think that site, though, includes the travel support that you were just mentioning. But there are internship opportunities, and you can find them on that website.
There's a concerted effort between the Coordinating Board and the Workforce Commission to work with the industry to increase the number of paid internships available as well. We'll have to see how successful that is, but through that website and others, to make it easier for both the student and the institution to find internships, because all of you that have tried to develop internships with local industry know how much work that can be. And it's not going to stop being work, but we need to at least add more to the stockpile where students can figure that out, and you can help them figure that out more easily. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I have to say I'm even more impressed than I was when I walked in that all of you are here, because it could have been so easy not to ask a question or raise legitimate concerns, and I think they are being they're being remembered, including the funding issue, which I think all of us agree is important. So don't think we're minimizing that in any kind of way whatsoever. We have 600,000 more students than we had in 2000, and we need to have the resources to support that. And by the way, if we get the graduation bonus for universities, that will provide more dollars for you to help students that isn't there already, and the commissioner requested $80 million more for that than our formula funding committee recommended, so $160 million. So let's make this work for students, and thank you. Be safe on your way home. And let me thank Kyla for stepping in at the last minute. I asked her if she'd be willing to do it. So this was really a last minute for her, so thank you. And again, thank all of you for staying here and actively participating. We need your help going forward, and sounds like we may have a work group that we have to put together to make this even better going forward, so thank you.